The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, also known as the Washington Flap, the Washington National Airport sightings, or the invasion of Washington, was a series of unidentified flying object reports from July 12 to July 29, 1952, over Washington, D.C. The most publicized sightings took place on consecutive weekends, July 19 to 20th and July 26 to 27th. UFO historian Curtis Peebles called the incident the climax of the 1952 UFO flap. Never before or after did Project Blue Book and the Air Force undergo such a tidal wave of UFO reports. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19, 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, today Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, spotted 7 objects on his radar. The objects were located 15 miles, 24 kilometers, south-southwest of the city. No known aircraft were in the area and the objects were not following any established flight paths. Nugent's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at the airport, watched the objects on Nugent's radar scope. He later wrote, "We knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft." Barnes had 2 controllers check Nugent's radar. They found that it was working normally. Barnes then called National Airport's radar-equipped control tower. The controllers there, Howard Coughlin and Joe Zacco, said that they also had unidentified blips on their radar screen and saw a hovering, bright light in the sky, which departed with incredible speed. Coughlin asked Zacco, "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" At this point, other objects appeared in all sectors of the radar scope. When they moved over the White House and the United States Capitol, Barnes called Andrews Air Force Base, located 10 miles from National Airport. Although Andrews reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, an airman soon called the base's control tower to report the sighting of a strange object. Airman William Brady, who was in the tower, then saw an object which appeared to be like an orange ball of fire, trailing a tail. "It was unlike anything I had ever seen before." As Brady tried to alert the other personnel in the tower, the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. On one of National Airport's runways, S.C. Pierman, a Capital Airlines pilot, was waiting in the cockpit of his DC-4 for permission to take off. After spotting what he believed to be a meteor, he was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing in on his position. Pierman observed 6 objects, white, tailless, fast-moving lights, over a 14-minute period. Pierman was in radio contact with Barnes during his sighting, and Barnes later related that each sighting coincided with a pip we could see near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at a high speed, it disappeared on our scope. Meanwhile, at Andrews Air Force Base, the control tower personnel were tracking on radar what some thought to be unknown objects, but others suspected, and in one instance were able to prove, were simply stars and meteors. However, Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light to the south. The light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude. This happened several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all 3 radar centers at the same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington, all of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Barnes that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. The objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. The sightings of July 19 to 20, 1952, made front-page headlines in newspapers around the nation. A typical example was the headline from the Cedar Rapids Gazette in Iowa. It read, "Saucers swarm over Capitol," in large black type. By coincidence, USAF Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, the supervisor of the Air Force's Project Blue Book investigation into UFO sightings, was in Washington at the time. However, he did not learn about the sightings until Monday, July 21st, when he read the headlines in a Washington area newspaper. After talking with intelligence officers at the Pentagon about the sightings, Ruppelt spent several hours trying to obtain a staff car so he could travel around Washington to investigate the sightings, but was refused as only generals and senior colonels could use staff cars. He was told that he could rent a taxicab with his own money. By this point, Ruppelt was so frustrated that he left Washington and flew back to Blue Book's headquarters at Wright-Patterson AFB in Dayton, Ohio. Upon returning to Dayton, Ruppelt spoke with an Air Force radar specialist, Captain Roy James, who felt that unusual weather conditions could have caused the unknown radar targets. At 8:15 p.m. on Saturday, July 26, 1952, a pilot and stewardess on a National Airlines flight into Washington observed some lights above their plane. Within minutes, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews AFB were tracking more unknown objects. USAF Master Sergeant Charles E. Cummings visually observed the objects at Andrews. He later said that these lights did not have the characteristics of shooting stars. There was no trails. They traveled faster than any shooting star I have ever seen. Meanwhile, Albert M. Chop, the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, arrived at National Airport and, due to security concerns, denied several reporters' requests to photograph the radar screens. He then joined the radar center personnel. By this time, 9:30 p.m., the radar center was detecting unknown objects in every sector. At times the objects traveled slowly, at other times they reversed direction and moved across the radar scope at speeds calculated at up to 7,000 miles per hour, 11,250 kilometers per hour. At 11:30 p.m., two U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. Captain John McHugo, the flight leader, was vectored towards the radar blips but saw nothing, despite repeated attempts. However, his wingman, Lieutenant William Patterson, did see four white glows and chased them. He told investigators said that I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet, and that I was at my maximum speed, but I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. According to Albert Chop, when ground control asked Patterson if he saw anything, Patterson replied, "I see them now and they're all around me. What should I do?" And nobody answered, because we didn't know what to tell him.